Boing.
Madame Medusa's pawn shop boutique.
Oh, boss.
In terms of framing, we have our screen left and screen right. So we have an element on the third here. We have our element which we just hooked up from, and then in the upper third we have Medusa's head. So the way you frame your shot is super important. So this is part of staging. So you want to make sure that everything's clear and you're drawing the eye to the right place. So one thing that we can look at, which I'm going to be talking about a lot today, is simple and complex lines. And what I mean by this is we can have, essentially, if I draw it in a different color, you can have a simple shape on one side of the body and then complex shapes on the other, and this helps break up the symmetry, makes a more appealing, interesting shape when it comes to silhouettes, and it also helps guide the eye. We've got like a simple line going through here. It kind of feeds through the elbow, and then we've got these little breaks in her hips. It kind of helps guide towards where that telephone was. Everything's facing into this direction. Now you can see that this would have been one of their key poses, which is like the overshoot. So when we have an action, you want to overshoot the action before you settle back in. The reason this, you can see he's exaggerated this much, is it still helps break the silhouette between the arm and the other, like between the hand and the other arm. So we're still getting some shapes in there that allow the entire silhouette to read. Now, you can also see there's a connection here between the chest and the arm. So as I'm bringing my arm around, I'm having to twist my chest, and adding twist to the body gives a sense of rhythm, and it helps, it makes a more interesting flow, and again makes the pose more interesting, whilst also keeping everything connected. You always want to have something leading and following through the action. So in here, since she's going to sit down onto this ledge of the desk, she's going to lead with her hips. So the hips are pushing first. So you still got the connection on the hand, so that it's supporting her weight as she leans back. And there's also, as she pushes away, you're getting these opposing actions. So one thing that's really interesting about this is, again, it kind of creates more appeal and a slight more entertainment value to have opposing actions. So as the hips are going this way, the chair is going the opposite, so you can feel the distribution of force almost in the middle. Now, one thing that's really important, which I'll probably mention a lot in these breakdowns, is shape language. Now, what I mean by this is, in a character, inherently in their design, they're going to have shapes which are going to be more emphasized than others. So for example, you get the typical, in character design, you'll have a character who may be very heavy on the top, they have very broad shoulders, and then they go very narrow to their hips, like Mr. Incredible, for example, from The Incredibles. And he'll have little legs or something. And then you may have the opposite, where there's a guy who has very thin shoulders, and then they have a very wide hip. These shapes are going to help you to, when you come to posing, to try and bring out a language in the character that is going to be consistent throughout, and it helps make the character feel more iconic. And so from a silhouette, you should be able to register who that character is just from the shapes. That's a really important thing here. So again, we've got a simple lines here, and then you've got all the complex on this side. So I'll say this is complex, and then we'll do in green is the simple. So he's kept the legs together, and it makes this nice asymmetry. He could have posed, for example, the leg here, and it would have made the pose feel more symmetrical. But by bringing the leg across, it brings out that asymmetry. So we're getting a lead. We're getting a lead with the upper arm coming round, and then the forearm is catching up, but the hand is trailing back. So you're getting this nice arc, which is going to eventually connect to her hip. So we're almost already easing in, and there's a slight twist here. So this is the breakdown in the hand, where it's started off like this and it's coming around. So we're twisting the hand around now, and we're keeping the finger. So the actual the other fingers apart from the index are already curled in, and he's trailing back. He's overlapping the finger so that it has an offset in timing, and it helps paint that arc. You almost follow the finger and it creates a nice arc going around. This is what I refer to also as isolated animation, which is really good to practice. Is you don't want to have too many things going on in different places at once because it becomes distracting. So at this point he's focusing on the weight shift, and by doing that, what I mean is he's making sure that pretty much everything in the body has finished settling, and now the hand is trailed behind, and so nothing else is going to move, and now the hand itself practically independently is now connecting to the body. So you're getting an offset in timing, but it's exaggerated, and that way we're now almost focusing on the hand and that action alone, and we don't have something like you could have had the head or the hand over here doing something else, but he deliberately kept it simple because it brings clarity to your shot and makes everything read better. And then once the hand is settled, that's when he changes the rhythm up and focuses on a different part of the body, which is the head. So now we're focusing on her face and the performance in her actual attitude in her face. We've got this quite nice simple shape as well going through the body where it's nearly a triangle, which I really like. So this is also a way to think about your poses, is if you can break it down into its simplest form. So from here, if this is our triangle, then we've added an extra accent on top here, and that's pretty much the only shapes we have. Like, they've added a slight right angle into the leg, but if we broke it down to its simplest form, that's pretty much the shapes that we're working with, which is really interesting. And you'll notice this, I feel like the best poses are when they are the most simple in terms of how you can create shapes out of them, because the more detail and the more complex it is, the more difficult it becomes to read. But for example, you could have had the elbow out here, and that would have added extra information that wasn't required, whereas actually having that hand point inwards while still reading, you're still able to read the upper arm and the forearm. It actually helps flow that line down through the leg.
Madame Medusa's pawn shop boutique.
So it says Madame Medusa's pawn shop boutique. So it's da 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 da, and he's used that rhythm to help break up the action by keeping it as simple as possible in the poses. Then you can use different components of the body to add the accents to change up the rhythm. So we had the push off, so it's Madame Medusa's, and then the hand settles in, then it's pawn shop boutique, and it's just in the head. You can see when she thinks, at this moment, she thinks it's a customer, right? So the subtext here is, welcome to our amazing place, essentially. Like, she's got this pawn shop and she's just like, welcome, kind of thing. So you can see she's very proud. So she's got a little smile to her face when she's like, oh, she goes pawn shop. And you can hear that in her voice as well. So just by listening to her voice, he's broken down that she's probably quite proud of her shop here. And these are things that he's consciously aware of as he's animating. So he's listening to her attitude. So we've hooked up and we've got this really nice, again, complex shape here. And then we have, on the opposite side, we have the simple. I want to mention how he's breaking up the face so that it's more flat on one side and it's leaning out this direction. So you can see how the nose is pointing out as well. So we're getting these angles which inherently... Sorry, let's change that line. So it's pointing outwards. So we're getting that asymmetry in the face. So one of my leads would teach me this great tip in terms of how you can change volume in your entire body of your pose to help create squash and stretch feeling. The way my lead would teach me how to do this would be to actually, if he was taller on one side, then when he squashes, as he gets shorter in space, he's also going to get wider. So this would be our anticipation pose now, where we're squashing the entire body. And then when we want to jump, when we stretch, we're going to thin out the entire character. And by this, what I mean is his overall silhouette is going to change. You don't have to physically squash and stretch it, if maybe that's not the style of the show, or whatever you're working on. But you can still change the volume in terms of what screen space they're using to give the sense of volume. So this is how I teach people to animate, is generally when I'm blocking, I have my 5 poses. So I have pose 1, anticipation, breakdown, overshoot, pose 2. These 5 poses are what you should have in your blocking pass. And then from there, that's when you can start adding the in-betweens and everything should connect. One common mistake I'll see in beginner's animation is when they pose hands. If I do this to camera now, a lot of people will pose a hand like this, where you can't see the upper arm behind. Now, just by tilting the hand slightly round, and you can see the connection between the upper arm and the forearm, makes that read so much better. So always find ways to pose the hand so that you can see it from either side. Never have it completely over the top of each other, because then it feels like their arm is shorter, doesn't it? It feels like now that's the length of my entire arm. And then he's changed it now so that there's pretty much still a line of action in the body, but it's literally just one shape. I could break that down to a square, and I love doing this with posing. I guess it comes down to taste as well, but I personally love this way of posing because it creates some really unique shapes that you wouldn't naturally think. This feels very symmetrical, but he's found ways to break it up by making it still slightly 3/4. So this arm is still slightly folded more in on itself, and then we've got more space on this arm to help break up that asymmetry. But I love finding ways to almost make twinned animation and then finding ways to offset it and still keep it really simple. So I love this kind of posing because it's actually it's relatively difficult to do, but you find very unique shapes and it makes your shot stand out above everyone else. Again, we've got simple on one side and then we got complex on the other. And you can see how he's splayed, because the hand comes together in this position. At this point, he's done the opposite. So instead of going up, instead of going down, like if he wants to jump, like I said, we go down to go up. The same way, if he's going to have the hand closed, maybe they splays out first. So if it was a settled pose like this, it splays out before it comes in.